So our next session is a panel discussion on how to build accessible products. And on stage, we have Shema Al-Khalili, Senior Program Advisor and Accessibility Directorate of Ontario, Jutta Treviranus, Professor at OCAD University, David Best, Accessibility IT Specialist at Best Accessibility Consulting, and Jennifer Taylor, Front-End Developer at Shopify. Moderating this discussion is George Zamfir, who is the Accessibility Product Manager at Slack, which I'm certain you've all used and loved. Everyone, please welcome your panelists on stage.
Thank you, Stu. Unfortunately, nothing following that is going to be as exciting. All right. Well, we've been doing sort of this accessibility panel for the last few years at FITC. The first time we did it, the people in the room were in the room because they didn't fit in any other rooms. This was about 5 years ago. But accessibility has been picking up, and it's become something that more and more organizations and companies are doing. And we're here to talk about it. We're here to talk about how to build products that are accessible, that are inclusive. And the way we'll do this is we'll start with some quick yes-no questions, because accessibility people tend to ramble. No, that's not true. That is not true. I'm sorry. I tend to ramble, so we're going to do quick yes-no questions so that we get a feel for where the panel is on different topics, and then we'll have a conversation. And if you feel, Shaima is going to do the first section with updates from the ADO and from the Accessibility Directorate, and then we'll do the sort of round the room. So, Shaima, I don't know if you want to go now.
Is my mic on? Yes, it's on. First of all, I'd like to say that I disagree with George. This is definitely going to be more exciting than hearing someone play the ukulele, hearing about Ontario legislation. Can I just get a feel of people in this room? Is anybody here in charge of submitting the accessibility compliance report for their companies? If not, then I'll just skip over that part. Okay, no. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of Ontario legislation, so I'm not sure if most of you guys know, but basically for web accessibility, any new websites, any content since 2012, any refresh websites, all have to be made accessible according to WCAG 2.0, level A. So this came into effect January 1st, 2014. Now since then, nothing new has come along. However, if you are building a website, or if you are significantly refreshing your website or adding any new content within that time period, then you need to be in compliance. Now, this is only for organizations who have 50 or more employees. They have to be in compliance. That's not to say that we don't encourage all organizations, of course, to be in compliance with this. We encourage everyone and everyone. What is coming up is that in 2021, all websites will need to be accessible for organizations 50 and plus, as well as content since 2012. And it needs to be updated to level AA. So just keep in mind that this is only 4 years away. So if you are doing any updates or creating a new website, you technically by law it just needs to be level A. However, 4 years is coming up. You don't want to duplicate efforts. You don't want to pay twice to do the same thing and just for a few small changes. So might as well take it as far as you can. I guess that's all I'll say for now. If anybody needs any definitions, we can go into that later. I'll just pass it on to whoever's next for now.
Sure.
And WCAG, for those of you who are not initiated, stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines of the W3C.
So what a surprise. The government wants us to build products that everybody can use. I'd say that's a pretty worthy goal for anyone, not just government. All right, let's start. Let's find some stuff that we disagree with, because I know we're going to agree on a lot of things. So we're going to do some quick yes-no questions. Do you think an accessible product makes for a better product for everyone? If yes, you have to give one example. Who wants to go first?
Yes. Do you want to start at the end?
Yes, let's start at the end.
In terms of a big business context, so if you're making a website accessible and 5% of your audience or clientele can't access it, then right away you're losing potential buyers, potential clients. So I guess that's one example from a web context.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I would definitely agree. I'm just thinking of on a more granular level, like personally when I browse the internet, say I'm at work watching a YouTube video and I don't have my headphones, like it's great to have closed captions so you don't disturb the rest of the office. That's something that benefits not just someone who is hard of hearing, but anyone like me.
That was going to be my example, so I'll use it. I'll use another example. Actually, something that we're doing at the moment. I don't know if any of you are using data analytics to make decisions on a website, et cetera, whether it's for HR practices or to determine some machine decision. One of the things that we've discovered is if your AI systems incorporate all of the data and don't norm out the outliers or the individuals that might have a disability who then become a minority at the edge, then you are going to have a machine decision system or a data system that is far better at predicting the future, at dealing with unexpected weak signals, etc. So you'll have a far better decision system. It works better to design for diversity, because if you design for diversity, you also design for the future and the unexpected.
Thank you. David?
Yeah. Accessibility is definitely a need in the products. And I would say the most outstanding example of an accessible product would be the iOS devices. I don't go anywhere without my iPhone because I can use it for not only navigation, GPS, but access the web. And it's important. That's why it's important to develop the webs so that they are not only mobile friendly, but they can be accessed by the voiceover on the phones.
Thank you. I set all of you up for failure because these were supposed to be yes/no questions.
Yeah.
No, that was great. I was going to give another example, which is not as super cool as your examples, and just say like the typewriter. One of the inventors of the typewriter, he invented it so that he can talk to his blind fiance while he was away at
That's Vint Cerf.
overseas. Sorry?
It's Vint Cerf.
No, so this was going back to the not the keyboard, the typewriter. Yeah. I'm sorry, I have bad examples. All right.
Steve Jacobs has created a site that's all about what are called electronic curb cuts. So it lists every advance or innovation. So if you just search for Steve Jacobs electronic curb cuts, everything and anything that you use was at one point designed, or not every, of course being hyperbolic, but many of the things that you're using in the room at the moment were originally designed for people with disabilities to address the challenges that people have who can't use the standard things, because of course innovation is at the edge.
Like voice recognition. Yeah. Like Siri. Sorry, I have a better
example.
Email. Yeah.
I can go on.
All right. Yes/no questions. So let's do one round where we actually do yes/no. Okay. Do you think accessibility is here to stay within products, or is it not? Yes/no. Shaima.
100%. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yuta. Yeah.
What do you define as accessibility?
Yes/no, please.
That's a
maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Did you say maybe because you think there's something better?
I said maybe because it'll be an integrated part of all products. So it'll be accessibility in a new definition, accessibility for all, as opposed to accessibility as it's currently defined, which seems to be largely a bolt-on or a gatekeeping checklist type of thing. So I think accessibility will morph once people realize the advantages of it, and it'll become invisible.
Mm-hmm. I agree, which makes the next question not as important anymore, but I'll ask it. So given an inaccessible product, so let's say anybody builds an inaccessible product, is it better to build than a separate, special, text-only alternative? Yes or no, Shaima?
No, I don't think so.
No. Can I qualify why? Does it have to be just a no?
I mean,
I'll just note that I think a text-only version just doesn't address all disabilities or levels of ability. For example, someone with dyslexia is not going to benefit from a text-only site, or someone like myself, I'm a very visual learner, so animations or images actually lessen the cognitive load for me, so text-only wouldn't cut it. Also, it perpetuates this myth that an accessible site has to be ugly, which is not true. There's like a lot of beautiful UI that are fully accessible, so text only isn't going to cut it.
thank you for qualifying it.
And to add to that wonderful qualification, the other reason is that if you were to take any population and plot it on a three-dimensional scatter plot, all of their requirements and the characteristics of those individuals, what you have is a starburst, and the individuals with disabilities are in the periphery, and at the periphery the dots are further apart from each other, so they're less alike. So thinking that you can create a site that is the accessible site is even more absurd than thinking you can create a site that is for the average or typical person, because there's no binary. We're a whole spectrum of diversity. So what we need to do is to create a site that stretches out as far to the periphery as we can.
Thank you. David?
Well, it depends on from the perspective. Who are you talking from the user perspective or the developer? Because a text-only web page or whatever product is something I really couldn't care less. As long as I can read it, I can access it. But I would say no, because from the provider point of view, you're increasing your workload. So what's the point?
What do you mean that you increase the workload?
You want to create two separate websites or one website that's completely accessible. So from the provider, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you can do that. I briefly worked in the telecom industry, and a telecom company that I would not name, not in Canada, which is great, they decided that rather than figuring out accessibility on different phones, they'll just build or create one accessible phone. You can imagine why that doesn't exist. So they said we have regular phones, and then we're going to have this special accessible phone that everybody's going to use, and you get any average and non-average blind user, and they will go for the iPhone. Or maybe nowadays they have more options, but they will go for an iPhone any day. Just a reminder, we practice this. Yes, no questions. It just doesn't work. No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. It's fine. Yes, it's fine. Yes. How should junior engineers learn about accessibility? Is it by reading the WCAG guidelines? Shaima.
How should they learn about accessibility? First of all, let me say that they should be learning about accessibility early on into their education. It should be something that's just ingrained in you right from the start. The problem now is that people are learning about accessibility way later on and trying to integrate it later on at later stages, and I think that's problematic. Once you get that culture shift going where, it becomes a matter of fact, we don't need to even ask these types of questions anymore, I think.
So they should not read. No. If I'm new to accessibility, I shouldn't start with WCAG?
You for yes,
no. You shouldn't start with that, no.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I would agree. So it can be pretty overwhelming to look at the WCAG documentation, especially if you're a junior developer. So I'd say go to a meetup in your city and start talking to people there, and maybe subscribe to A11Y Weekly, which just dumps a bunch of awesome accessibility-oriented articles in your inbox every week, and that's a good way to start hearing people talk about it in an accessible way.
Yeah, I agree. Join a community. Actually, we have a program where you can come peer program with us or work on inclusive design project together with our awesome design and development team for a period of time. And there are great communities, including the A11Y. We have a community list. So definitely don't read WCAG initially, because it's quite overwhelming. If you want to learn about WCAG, look for an ATAG compliant. No, ATAG is the authoring tool, Accessibility Guidelines, which integrates the accessibility work into your development tools and into your authoring environments, and you learn that way. But the biggest way, I think, is to gain experience in a co-design team where there are individuals who have lived experience of accessibility barriers, who can help to enlighten you and inform you and motivate you to understand why it's really critical and important and to your benefit to do accessible development.
David, please just say no.
No, I think you should start with YouTube. you really need to look.
Actually, Google is putting out amazing videos on how they do accessibility.
There's a lot of good stuff out there. And I say start with the user. Look at what the user's doing, how the user does it. And then when you've got a good, diverse idea of the different types of disabilities, then you get someone like myself to come in and give you a lunch and learn or a workshop on hands-on experience of the devices. And then from that, when you start reading about WCAG, it makes a lot more sense.
If you do start reading WCAG as your starting point, just do it when you need to really go to sleep.
Yeah.
It is great. We have some colleagues who work on WCAG, so they're probably not going to be very happy with what we have to say.
No, we agree.
My personal take and my experience as a developer and also as someone who has tried to influence culture and change so people embrace accessibility at a team level is that anything you can do in terms of culture is much more valuable than dumping any sort of information or process. The absolute best thing that developers, designers, anyone wants is to add more stuff to their product development process. Like, my job is to build product. Thanks for, dumping this 256 pages, whatever document to read in order to ship product. So anything you can do at the culture level, introduce one accessibility thing that everybody's going to do. Do keyboard testing for a lunch and learn. Anything like that is probably going to be more impactful in the long term than just, like I said, starting with the dry stuff of accessibility. Yeah.
Can I just do a quick plug? For those of you who are looking for resources, specifically free resources, the Ontario government has recently worked with Ryerson through its Enabling Change program. So the Chang School of Continuing Education has developed 2 free courses specifically for accessible web development. One is geared towards managers and leaders of companies. One of them is just a general course. So it's just to help managers, develop a culture shift within the company, and then it provides you with resources and guides to make your website accessible, your products accessible. So it's a really small commitment. It's one of them is 3 weeks. The general one is 4 weeks. The one for managers and leaders is 3 weeks. There's one starting October 9th. Again, it's free. It's a small commitment. It's rated really well. The first course ran in this summer. There's going to be 2 more in the fall and 2 more in the winter. So if you guys want to check that out, it's a good resource.
And for a persistent guide, I'll recommend 2 resources: guide.inclusivedesign.ca, and then the Fluid Project, fluidproject.org, also has components and things like that, stuff you can steal. It's all open source, open access, free to use.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll also plug a few other things. HackerU has been doing continuous, or for the last few years, accessibility sessions. I know, Jen, you were involved with HackerU as well.
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So there are a bunch of, dev bootcamp programs and a bunch of organizations who are doing accessibility. So probably that is a great starting point. I'll plug the Accessibility Conference, which is happening on Thursday and Friday. I think there are still a few tickets left, but it's basically Toronto's first accessibility conference wait, it's not the first accessibility conference. All right, so it used to be a camp that a bunch of people were organizing. The camp was free, et cetera, et cetera. There's a big accessibility conference in the United States, and we wanted to do one in Toronto, built by or sort of organized by the community. So anyways, this is happening on Thursday and Friday. If you don't catch that, the accessibility meetup is by far the best place to start. Sorry, it's not the only place to start. It's a good place to start. All right. Let's say you design a new product, right? So you build a product from scratch. Should you focus on 80% of the users because you can build a product for them faster or what have you, and do the 20% later? Yes or no? I'll start with you, Tat. Yes or no?
No, but can I?
I will. This
Okay,
is not
so
going
if you're
very well
worried
for me.
about cost, we've actually done some economic modeling to show that if you design right to the edge, meaning that you incorporate the needs and characteristics of the largest group of individuals rather than that 80-20, you are going to save money in the long run. The lifespan of your product will be longer. There may be some additional upfront costs, but over any period, you will gain longevity and it will cost less. Because if you just design for that 80%, everybody will come with requests or complaints, and you will continuously have to add or bolt on additional things, and it becomes very brittle and it will deteriorate. So design your products to be to encompass the greatest diversity of requirements and to be capable of adding or sufficiently modular, transformable, etc., then you're going to save money in the long run.
That was a perfect no question.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, Shema?
No, I agree with you. It's better to do it all at once, like I was saying about the websites. If it's something you're going to have to take into account eventually, you might as well do it from the get-go and just make it inclusive for everyone.
I would echo that exactly.
David?
No. I really think the problem we have here is we're saying accessibility is something separate and you got to design it. And I say, no, you got to look at your marketing strategy. You know, who are you trying to reach? Don't worry about, you know, what you're trying to design, but do you want to reach a large market or not? And your design should really be based on your brand. You know, the marketing. What's your marketing strategy? Build the accessibility right into that. Don't think that you're going to have a product and you got to say, okay, we got to make it accessible. It's not going to work.
And it'll benefit the people that you think you need are your core customers or the largest customer base.
Can I just add to that? I would like just to clarify, because it's extremely important that people understand the definitions of accessibility. When I go and do workshops, one of the two questions I ask is, what's your definition of disability and what's your definition of accessibility? And I think it's extremely important that when you're developing a product that you understand that accessibility is really just a measurement of productivity. Inclusive design means inclusion. You actually have inclusion. So, and that's something I could talk about more about, but the design of accessibility is simply a measurement of productivity. What are the performance values that you are using in your organization to measure productivity? And that's what accessibility should be all about.
Got it. Agreed. So because the yes/no questions were so long, we're
You've got one more.
We're going to do the panel discussion to be super short. So the sort of the follow-up question to this, which is the last question in this segment, should you choose one winning design that addresses the needs of the largest customer base? Yes, no.
Sorry.
So
I can respond to that.
Okay.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
So this gets to the whole design research and product planning and prototyping and things like that. When a lot of companies do design research, they have a number of prototypes or candidate designs, and they select one as the one that addresses the needs of the largest number of customers within the largest number of scenarios. A new strategy that is showing to be far, far more productive and better with respect to innovation, longevity, all of those other characteristics you want, is instead to find a design that stretches as far as possible, that invite the people who hate your current design or your previous design, or who can't use your previous design, to test your designs and make sure that they are included, because that will then progress your design, add additional innovations, ensure that you are addressing new challenges that your competitors aren't addressing. And it works better as a corporate strategy and as a development strategy.
Yeah, one example that I've seen recently given that makes that point from the sort of responsive design world was that you design for the extremes, so for the smallest screen, lowest performance phone, et cetera, and then the widest screen, TV, if you like, TV-like interface and so on. So once you capture, let's say, those extremes, then you also capture the middle kind of thing. But you start from that. And it's interesting because we're talking about diversity of devices and, devices performance metrics and screen sizes and so on, but we somehow not think as thoroughly when we think of the diversity of the actual people using products. So I think we're all in agreement with that one. Can I cut it short so subtly? Okay. I would jump to a question for Jennifer, because I'm in general I'm always fascinated how people get into accessibility, and I consider the way you got into it to be very inspiring. Sometimes people think about accessibility as not being as cool, or there aren't very cool career paths, and so on. So I was wondering if you want to share how you got into accessibility, whether it was education or and the work that you're doing now.
Sure, yeah. It started back when I was a student, and one of my instructors, Simon, he was simultaneously producing a website that had to meet the AA conformance level. So he spoke about it in class, and it totally burst my bubble. I had previously lived in this naive world where the internet is this democratic space where everyone has access to information, but it made me totally rethink the way that I thought about the internet, and made me realize that a lot of people face a lot of different barriers. And then from there, I went on to join the HackerU bootcamp. And while I was a student there, my friend Maureen and I, we both were super interested in accessibility, and we decided that every Friday at lunch we were going to eat pizza and chat about it and sort of help each other with accessibility issues that we were both facing in building our projects, and also share information that we stumbled across during the week. And first, a few students showed up, and then the next week, a few more, and then suddenly we realized, oh, this is, young junior developers are hungry for this knowledge, and it benefits me to teach them. So after the boot camp, we decided that we were going to turn it into a meetup for junior developers, and HackerU is super supportive in helping us make that happen. So yeah, now we have a meetup, the HackerU Web Accessibility Meetup, and my main goal is not to go around and do this shaming, finger wagging, you suck if you don't know anything about accessibility, because I think at this point everyone's pretty familiar. It's important to make your product or your website accessible to everyone. My main goal is just to empower developers, especially junior developers who are new with this severe imposter syndrome, to give them the resources to go into their first job or their next job and actually start writing accessible code. So yeah, I've been doing meetups where one barrier I noticed that a lot of junior developers, including myself, had was that the WCAG documentation is super intimidating. So we did a meetup called Welcome to WCAG, and we talked about how do you actually read this documentation? How do you use it to find resources to make decisions about how to implement accessible products? And that's something that any dev can do at their work. Just invest 2 hours in learning about WCAG and then do a lunch and learn, and you'll be better at reading the documentation, and then your entire team will be better. And another thing we did was a lot of junior developers want to test with screen readers, but they don't know how, because using a screen reader can be pretty challenging if you're not a regular user. So the meetup, we created 2 cheat sheets, an NVDA cheat sheet and a voiceover cheat sheet that you can just have like beside your computer with all the keyboard shortcuts. And then we invited in a regular screen reader user to sort of like chat about like what to look for when you're testing with a screen reader, because that's hard to know when you don't use it every day to browse the web. So hopefully those are some ideas that you can take back to your teams and maybe work to implement for like a cool lunch and learn. Or you can come to the HackerU Web Accessibility Meetup, which is coming up in October.
What is your accessibility work looking like today at Shopify?
So I'm trying to sort of take that goal of like empowering developers and apply it to my current team. So I noticed that we have a lot of like accessibility gaps on my team where we focus mostly on Shopify.com. So I thought maybe if we had like a central source of truth, like some accessibility documentation, then everyone could sort of incorporate that into what they're building. So over the summer, me and Kenny the intern took on the task of building an accessibility style guide. And it's a good way, too, of like starting a conversation, like, oh, why does this video module not have an option to like pause the background video if it autoplays, or like, why does this form like not have a proper label here? So it's a good way to start the conversation.
Thank you. That was fantastic, right?
Thank you.
Okay. Utah. We were talking the other day about IDRC collaboration with Microsoft. So your collaboration with Microsoft, and they recently embraced sort of an entire inclusive design thinking and philosophy and make it part of their design language. For me, that was the first time when I saw a really large company just completely making inclusive design just part of the regular design language. What are the some developer, or maybe not maybe design as well, but some specific things that people can take away right away from the inclusive design principles? I know it's not easy. What are some things that we can implement today that would do fit well with the inclusive design principles that maybe Microsoft is using? I don't know.
Yeah, actually, Microsoft is a great case study in the impact of inclusive design. They came to us because they wanted to make themselves cool again, and they wanted to.
Did I mention that it is video recorded, the session?
Yeah, no. That's they've openly said that. So. And you can. There's actually a Fast Company article called "Microsoft's Radical Bet on a New Form of Design Thinking," and there's, according to Cliff Huang, it was a way to become cool again. But I think I talk about inclusive design as something that you should do out of enlightened self-interest. It's not. I mean, I think the regulations that we're talking about and WCAG, et cetera, is just a way to help the laggards who don't understand the importance of this sort of, and not as a derogatory term, but it's I helped to author WCAG and ATAG and all of those things. But if you are thinking proactively from the beginning in an inclusive way, then you don't need to worry about that. You're going to do it anyways. It sort of is incorporated. It's a checklist just to see that you didn't forget something. But what are the Microsoft's case example? If you actually look at Microsoft Inclusive or Google Microsoft Inclusive, or search it on the web with whatever web search engine you wish, there's a whole set of 12 videos that are quite informative. More than 12, actually. There's a whole library. They hired a great documentary company and did a number of instructional videos, and we persuaded them that being cool again means you make your stuff openly available and as well. So they embraced openness as well as inclusive design, because a large part of inclusive design is about being open and transparent and pooling and sharing, because in this space we don't have enough resources to be proprietary and to redundantly redo the work. So what I would recommend, you were asking for some practical things. Search for Microsoft Inclusive. Look at the videos that are there. The toolkit that was created is also a great resource. It's based upon our toolkit. Our toolkit is intended as a living document, and so it's sort of a freeze frame of some of what we're doing. If you want to participate in adding additional activities, processes, tools, you can go to both and add them to ours. And the outcome has been actually that they have introduced a number of new products that are much more successful and that have raised the reputation of Microsoft within this space. There are other companies that have also followed suit, and I won't. George is looking at me like I'm. I'll try not to be the rambling accessibility person. But the lesson to learn is that it is a good thing. There are very, very practical, down-to-earth suggestions within that as well for the design process and for how you would do proactive planning of accessible products. Okay, do I get a star?
Perfect.
For
Yes. Thank you. I am, of course, joking. This is very valuable. David, I've heard you, and I was not eavesdropping, I promise. But I've heard you say an anecdote before that sort of that conference attendees or just people coming up and talking to you always ask you about how to build accessible software, and your answer has been, well, if your company were to, if people's company were to hire you, would you be successful building products in that company? What's the? I always wanted to ask you, what is the anecdote teaching us, or what are we trying? What was the point that you are making?
Okay. Where do I go with this? Because I speak to you as a user,
Yep.
and I speak in terms of my experiences. So basically, I'm going to say that perception is not necessarily reality. And unfortunately, there's a lot of organizations out there that say they are the inclusive organization, and they've got the magic wand to help you make everything accessible. And if I come along and I sort of shatter everybody's dreams. So, but what I would say is that accessibility is not an endpoint. Accessibility is an experience. It's a journey, and accessible websites is only a window onto your organization. Websites is only a tip of the iceberg, because we live in such a digitally connected world now, so that if you want to be truly an inclusive organization, you have to think beyond the website, because the website is just a window to your organization. So you have to think of the processes, procedures, your development strategy, and look around the organization. How many blind people do you see in your company? How many people do you see that have a disability at senior levels? And if you don't see anyone, then the problem is not your website. There's a problem within the strategy of the organization itself. So when I say that, if you want to build a website, don't just ask someone to come in, a blind person to come in and do testing for you. Build your organization around the inclusive. Procurement needs to be accessible, not only the website. So anyways, what goes on behind the scenes is very important. So when you build a website, you're actually building a window into the organization. So there's digital connection, and this is where a lot of the work I do is with wearable technologies, GPS navigation, banking, ATMs, and all these connect into the organization. And unless you have an inclusive strategy within the organization, the website simply will not matter to an individual like myself.
Yeah, thank you. That's a powerful lesson, and I'll give, if that's okay, I'll give a quick example from Slack. And this is not an easy example, but Up until a few months ago, Slack was not accessible by keyboard. So you could not use Slack with the keyboard, you could only use it with the mouse. And this goes back basically 3-4 years ago when Slack was built. It was a simple decision that somebody made that if you press tab, the focus will always go in the message box. Imagine Google, you press tab and it will always take you in the search box, because that's a super quick shortcut way to do it. Imagine having somebody who needs keyboard accessibility working at Slack when Slack was 30 people. You would not have this problem. Now, this is not to say that, this is the point of diversity, and it's not necessarily that you have to hire a person representing different groups to make your product better, but it is an example of making products better because you had diversity in what have you, opinions, expertise, technology, etc. But you mentioned the development process. Can I ask you really quickly, David, if you were in charge of the development process of a company, what are the 1-2 things that you would absolutely put in place that would result in more accessible products?
Oh, definitely a accessibility chief officer, a liaison that has the thread that goes right from design to development to testing to the user. And one question that I would have is, it's interesting, people think that we're designing for people with disabilities. And no, when you have your project life cycle, you've got to have a constant thread right through it, an integrated strategy right from design. But the question I have is, how many people in this room are not aging?
Are not aging?
Are not aging.
Put your hand up and say "I," because David can see you.
How many people can guarantee that they'll never have an accident or get sick? You'll never have a broken arm or anything. If you can guarantee that you'll never have a limitation, if you can guarantee that you're not aging, then you don't need to be here, because disability is a human condition. It's not just a particular limitation, but it's a human condition, and that's why you need to develop a project life strategy that considers the whole spectrum of the human capability.
And I'll add another example of why it's beneficial. If you want your systems, your web to be IoT ready, if you follow the inclusive design accessibility principles, then you'll be able to ingest data, add different visualizations. There are almost anything that it makes it future friendly. Because if you think of it, individuals with disabilities are using alternative access systems. Individuals who speak another language, require translations, are using alternative access systems. So it increases interoperability, it increases the longevity of your products and the future readiness of your products.
And I like to say, if you're at a company where a chief officer of accessibility isn't possible, take the Kenny the intern approach, which is, he was an intern with us for 4 months and he was super interested in accessibility, but he knew he wasn't going to redesign all of Shopify in 4 months. So he focused on one thing and he was like, I'm going to kill it with alt text. And he did an audit of all the alt text, saw where we weren't doing it properly, where we had written shitty alt text, where alt text wasn't even necessary because it was a purely decorative icon, and he worked on that. So if you go back to work tomorrow and you're like, oh, shit, we don't have an accessibility officer, just pick one thing and just do that. And then once that's done, move on to the next thing. It's the Kenny the intern approach.
You can just drop the mic and just finish there. That's it. Thank you.